I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking about the series Maigret. And I'm joined today by Benjamin Wainwright, Stefanie Martini, and writer, creator, and also director on the series, Patrick Harbinson. And Patrick, I wanted to start with you in talking about the way that you've structured this series, because one of the things I find so interesting is it's not just the element of, okay, this is the particular case that we're investigating this week, and this is what it's going to tell us about the characters, but you've kind of really gone a lot more in depth with having things flow over into subsequent episodes and kind of like looking at, the lingering impact of certain moments throughout the rest of the season. And I was interested in how you set about determining that particular structure and why it felt like the right fit for this show.
I always wanted the Maigrets, even though they're very short books, 150 pages on average, to be 2 hours so that we could dig into the stories more deeply and expand them where necessary. So that was the reason for the 2 hour films, the three 2 hour films, but with a, I hope, decent cliffhanger at the end of each middle episode. So that was the first structural, important structural element. Then, very simply, I wanted to combine, as I think the best series like Prime Suspect and others always used to, the series and serial. So the visitor, the guest viewer can watch an episode or a 2 hour story, but those who followed it are going to be rewarded basically with a satisfying emotional arc. And I'm doing that in the next series too. And I hope, I just find it, as a writer, I find it enjoyable. And I think it gives, the actors will tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it also gives the actors something to hold on to through all the crime stuff.
I love that description. And Benjamin, for you in playing Maigret, he's someone who has quite a quiet introspect to him. And I was interested in how Patrick's writing and the scripts really gave you that window into your portrayal of him and how you set about developing him and inhabiting him in that way.
Yeah, I think it's quite nice to play someone who's sort of taciturn and doesn't say a lot and does a lot of thinking, because generally I talk too much and don't think that much. So it's been quite cathartic for me. But yeah, Patrick's scripts they're very economical and simple, like Simenon's books. And I think it's nice to not get too florid. I mean, I always knew where Maigret was and where he was going. And as Patrick just said, having this plot that kind of took us through episodes 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 meant that when the crime stuff, as Patrick calls it, was getting a bit confusing, shooting everything out of sync, I just kind of had to work out where I was emotionally in that wider plot. So it was a relief to have that structure, I think. Yeah.
It's wonderful. And Stephanie, in talking about your portrayal of Louise Maigret, I was interested in the fact that she's works professionally as a psychiatric nurse, because I feel like that immediately tells us a lot about her demeanor and her personality and the way that she connects with people. And so even just when you looked at that one singular detail, how did that give you a real foundation of who she was going to be for you?
Well, she's a people person and she's quite practical, and it made sense of this relationship. I think it made it on a level and like made them feel like equals to me, and that was really important, I think. And also just the knowledge that she's got difficult stuff going on too. She's got her own life, and like having a different sort of energy to come into a scene with was useful for me.
I love that. And Patrick, as you're kind of mapping out the details of these cases, you very much set it in the present day in Paris. And so you're leaning into the technology of today. You've got CCT surveillance going on in certain situations and cell phones and social media coming into the foreground. What was it that made you realize that it was really important for you to set it in the present and to really utilize and lean on those as part of the storytelling?
I'll answer that very quickly. There's just one thing that you're asking Steph about, that's for the psychiatric nurseness of Madame Maigret. Or a lot of Maigret books have these scenes where Maigret's out all night. He comes home early in the morning, or on 2 in the morning, or on 11, and Madame Maigret often gets up and makes him a cup of coffee. This whole series starts with Madame Maigret, Louise Maigret, coming home from work, and he's the one asleep. He's the one waking, and so just that was a little bit of contemporizing as well. Okay, she works. He is not always the one, and it's very subtle. I didn't talk about it. I mean, it's just they're used to it, but it's a nudge to the viewer. This is new. This is different, and then what you're saying about CCTV and GPS and all that nightmare. That was the reason at first when I was asked to do this, I wanted to put it in a period, and I was spent time thinking about the 70s, maybe the 80s, and it was only when I realized, no, this is wrong. I have to cope with the problems that CCTV and GPS and cell phones and give to every crime writer. It's very difficult to commit crimes now. So I just decided to embrace it and have a Maigret. At first, I thought Maigret doesn't use a cell phone, but then I thought that's silly. So it was great fun to sort of choose a sort of different way through this, and it was just a challenge I had to embrace, as every crime writer has to embrace.
And Benjamin, in taking on this role, how helpful was it or not to kind of dive into some of the research elements to really understand a lot of the expositional dialogue, because your character is kind of a conduit for the audience in understanding a lot of what's going on throughout these episodes as well?
I'd say not that useful. I mean, generally my approach is quite like research heavy, and you go off and find the facts of these things and how a French police department might work. But I got a sense quite quickly that, well, Patrick didn't care that much about that kind of stuff, and I'm not sure Maigret did either. I'm sure he did his research, but ultimately it's what Maigret does and how he operates. And I felt like trying to get to a psychological depth was more important than worrying about the rules, because Maigret doesn't really care about the rules. He kind of does as much as he can to a point within the law or within the sort of instruction manual, and then he jumps off and does his human thing. So yeah, it was actually quite nice to not bury myself in really dull academic tones about policing in France, because I don't think it's relevant.
I love that answer. And, Stefanie, to Patrick's point, you're playing a character who has an entire world of existence that we're not necessarily seeing on screen. And I was curious about how much you kind of like thought about that world, or which details were helpful for you to kind of construct as part of her backstory, even though we don't see it on screen, because it ultimately still forms and shapes who she is in the scenes that we do see you.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of do all of it. I do all of it. If I've got a part, I'll be like, I'll just do loads and loads of research about things, and like 99% of it is not useful. But I found it interesting anyway. I think I'd quite like to be a psychiatric nurse. I got really into it, and then I sort of do all of that stuff, and then turn up, and it goes, and what is useful stays, and what isn't useful, goes, and then. I don't know. Like we were saying before about who she is and the core of who she is, it's useful in that way. But at the end of the day, my role sort of in this show was very much just about them and how they're feeling together and whatever was coming up between us in those scenes. And for me, sometimes if I'm like bogging myself down with anything other than the energy I've just come in with, it gets a bit heady, and that's not that useful for me, I think.
Yeah. And, for the two of you in playing this marriage, there's a continued plot point where we're kind of seeing the two of them really want to start a family, but struggling to do so, and going through IVF treatments and all of these other obstacles. And it's kind of really sweet to see the way that they support each other emotionally, and they try to kind of manage their own feelings and internalize things, but then also be very supportive of the other. And so I was interested in just the dynamic of finding that together and playing a lot of those scenes with each other throughout.
Is
it?
it?
Yeah.
No. Yeah, it's funny. Like, it's that kind of thing is it's so around us. We have friends going through it, and we've heard all about it, and it's very close. Certainly at this sort of stage in life. So I don't think we had to really go looking for it. And I was asked this question by another interviewer, because it's actually the first scene we shot was after we got back from the hospital, and I don't know, it was just kind of there, which sometimes it isn't.
Yeah,
I want to say we did all of these amazing acting exercises or whatever, but no, so it's kind of in the air sometimes.
Yeah, and I think for you're filming the whole of the rest of the show. For me, like, my whole sort of journey is based around this relationship. And I was only watching it the other day and thinking, and I obviously when I'm doing it, I'm just thinking about our our through line and nothing else. So it's pretty easy, straightforward for me. But for you, I like, there's that bit when you're by the pool and then you're like everything's going wrong. And I thought that was really interesting because it's not a kind of grief or loss that is easy to talk about or sort of in conversation that often. And I thought that sort of moment really struck me and was really beautiful, because like, how do you just continue through your day-to-day life whilst this is going on? And that's what a lot of, I guess, people that we know are going through. And it's not straightforward and it's so tricky and people don't really talk about it. And that's why I felt, quite honoured to be able to explore that in this, really.
Definitely. And even for you, Patrick, sorry.
No, go, Mara.
I was going to say, even for you in kind of writing that through line and having that as a centralized story in their relationship, how did you feel like that really gave Maigret a whole other set of dimensions to be able to dive into him as a character for you?
It was funny. I'd read probably 40 of the damn novels, and then I came across one line which said something like that they had never had children was a constant heartbreak to them. That's it. So I think in 70 novels, it's the only mention. I thought, oh, of course. And I've got a young Maigret, young Louise Maigret. Why don't they have children? So it just provided a story, and this now we're telling the story. And as to what Stefanie just said, people, yes, they talk about it, and no, they don't talk about it. And because it's so familiar, I just knew with these two actors, I didn't need to write anything. I just needed to have the things happen, then give them space in the scenes, whether it's an unanswered phone call, whatever it is. And I knew, and they both, I think, delivered marvelously. It's really moving. It's great.
And as you just mentioned, obviously, there being dozens and dozens of these books and having read so many of them yourself, what was that initial process of really looking at the source material and finding, even just little introspective details like that suddenly become much more important to bring into the story that you're telling, beyond even just the cases themselves?
It was, again, I probably read 20 before I fixed on The Lazy Burglar, which is the first one. And I fixed on it because of a line from the prosecutor Carnival, played by Nazanin Natalie Armin, which is to Maigret over the dead body on the riverbank, a dead body that has no face. And she says, it's a tragedy, of course, but there are so many, and instructs Maigret to go off and investigate the bank robberies that are plaguing Paris. And I thought, that's a great line. It's a Simenon line, obviously. And I thought I can take Maigret down a line where he is in conflict with authority, and we can study Maigret's sort of fascination with the criminal, as opposed to the proper the bourgeois figures in society, banks, policemen, lawyers, etc., etc. It just felt to me it would have all the elements to tell an exciting crime story, but one that had this really complicated, ambiguous moral undertow, and I think Ben just delivered that sort of dichotomy really beautifully.
And also for you, Ben, in
Morally,
for you, Ben, in playing Maigret, there's a lot of emotions that he kind of represses and internalizes, but at the same time, there's moments where he's a little bit more combustible and things do kind of bubble up from beneath the surface. Sometimes we see his anger suddenly coming to the surface in different ways through his work and his cases. What was your experience in finding the emotional landscape and those different levels throughout the show?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because what's nice about doing a young Maigret, I didn't really know much about Maigret before I came to getting the role. But, he's a very staid older gentleman generally, and he's very consistent and plodding and ruminative and all of these things. And what was nice is to have a bit more dynamism and someone who's less in control of his emotions and is still kind of trying on the coat of Chief Inspector and getting it wrong. And losing suspects, people die quite frequently under his watch, and he's screwing up at home every now and then, quite badly towards the end of the series. And I think we can all be quite erratic, and it's really nice to be able to kind of explore the boundaries of his character, because I'm not sure previous Maigrets have had so much scope. So that was, yeah, it's a pleasure.
Was that something in the writing of Maigret, Patrick, that you found early on in terms of just wanting there to be a bit more scope to the emotion of the character?
Yeah, I mean the young Maigret gives me every excuse, if you like. I'm sure their old diehard Maigret fans will be a little surprised to see Ben and Steph. Um, but I think even by the end of episode one, they'll be won over by them, and by the end of episode six, I sincerely hope they love them. Because it is still Maigret. You know, the Simenon books, they're short, they're sharp, they're funny, they're racy, they're violent, and they're disturbing. The reason I was so excited to be offered this job was I felt that however good the last two British Maigrets, Gambon and Atkinson, had been in their way, I felt they hadn't caught all of Simenon, and I was really keen to do that. And having a young Maigret gave me that excuse to, you know, use anger, use fear, use uncertainty, confusion, and all those things, which Ben and Steph both, I mean, have delivered.
Yeah. And it's definitely kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. You're playing a character who has almost kind of like a calmness and an introspect in the way that her emotions express themselves. And what was that like for you finding that side of her?
Lovely. It was kind of a real joy to play someone who I think was so sort of centered. And I think it's just a sort of quiet intelligence and a reading of people, which is the same as him, I guess. And I think she's somebody who puts other people first, is kind of how I made sense of going through quite big things and then sort of not like losing herself everywhere. As I was like, no, she sort of is one of those people where like it's more about scanning the room. Is everyone else okay? And that, I don't know, just as an internal decision, I don't know if anyone could see that, but that's sort of what made sense of her to me. But it was like a lovely experience, to be honest, to play someone who's just in themselves and knows themselves and isn't trying to, I don't know, win over a situation or manipulate anyone. It's really lovely.
One of the moments I love.
There are plenty of places for Louise to cry in these 6 hours.
Yeah.
And she does it once, unscripted, in a scene on her own. She and director Faye Gilbert Stefan Faye just saw this incredible shot, and I thought, genius, genius. It's just, you know,
it's a good shot.
I didn't think.
Well, it's good performance. Good directing, good everything. It was lovely. A lot of this, I personally feel this series rewards second viewings. I mean, I know people have far too much to watch, but because there are so many, this cast has given us so many little delights, subtleties, and grace notes that just surprised even me when I've watched it too many damn times.
Yeah. Patrick and Ben, I also wanted to ask you about the aspects that come into play from Maigret's childhood. You know, we kind of start to see these little flashback moments, and sometimes it's something coming to him in a dream. Sometimes it's a memory that's sitting with him in the middle of a case because it's somehow tied to his childhood. And I was interested in just the journey of shaping that side of the character and what you really wanted to bring into the foreground with those memories and dreams and flashbacks.
Please, Patrick.
I'll do it very quickly. I mean, again, it was another reason to choose Lazy Burglar because it starts with Maigret asleep, I think, yes, and remembering waking up in a winter morning and in Saint-Fiacre, the village where he grew up, and his father waking him because he's altar boy at the early mass. So, and then going to church and his boots breaking the ice and the puddles as he goes there. So I thought that's lovely. Can I do that for an altar boy in 1996, which I think was probably the right date, and decided yes. And that was the start, again, gave me the idea to make Saint-Fiacre the return home, if you like, the overarching story of this. And then Ben delivered it.
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a delight of leading this series is that you've got all of this detail that relates to you, and then also 75 books and another 25 short stories that all kind of can fill in that detail. And you, like you asked earlier about what did I do a lot of research on policing. You know, most of my research was into Maigret and his life and how it's changed over you know, Simenon was always kind of writing and rewriting his history, and Patrick rather, has pounced on some details that work for us. And then I think hopefully in the second series, we've got more to explore if it were to happen, with how he, you know, met Louise, what drove him into the police, all of those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, we all live a kind of father and son story, I think. And it's interesting to explore that dynamic and whether he takes on his father's story or decides he's going to be his own man. And yeah, we'll see.
We will. And Patrick, as well, you know, one of the things that's so well crafted in the way that you've kind of shaped this series and these particular cases is that when you kind of increase the stakes or increase the tension of it, it's not necessarily that it needs to be some big dramatic stunt driven scene. It's more the introspective, you know, how is this impacting and how is this sitting with Maigret and his team, because they're trying to accomplish something and feeling like it's not necessarily working. And so the internal pressure kind of builds more than the external pressure in a lot of instances as well. And so I just wanted to ask about shaping and crafting all of that.
I love action. I love writing it. I love watching it, and I've decided I love directing it. So if I can find an excuse, I will put it in, especially in Maigret, which is not really known for its action sequences. But I think the best sequences in this first series are those where we have two people talking or three people talking in a room. That's it. I mean, that's, for me, is always the essence of TV drama. And there may be a gun or a knife or something in there too, but it's basically it's people persuading other people to do things they passionately do not want to do. You know, I think that's the essence. And I think what I love about the books we've chosen this time around is that they enabled me to find those sort of climactic sequences where I could put Ben in and sometimes Steph in absolutely impossible situations and write them. This was absolutely key to me, write them plausibly so that the audience, I felt, was believing every step that they were seeing. That was key.
Yeah. Because Ben, it also allows you the opportunity to really play a lot of that internalized pressure. And, you know, we kind of see Maigret as someone who's really hard on himself when he feels like he's making mistakes or he hasn't figured something out, or, okay, we thought we solved the case, but now we've kind of actually realized that there's still more to it. And so what was your experience in stepping into that side of the character?
Yeah, I mean, I think the more acting I do, the more, you know, you get a script like Maigret and you're like, great, I'm a cop. It means guns and police car chases and all sorts of stuff. And then you're kind of flicking through and you're like, hang on, there's a bit missing here. Not that we don't have that, but like increasingly you realize the interesting stuff, as Patrick said, is just sitting across from someone doing a very quiet, talky scene. And that's actually the thrill for us. And shooting action is very time consuming, very difficult, technical, and there's not really much room for the acting. And, you know, stuntmen are paid to do that stuff well. We're paid to do the talking and the psychological depth. So I think I realized on this job, I was like, yeah, I like these long scenes just opposite, you know, and delicate ones with Steph. And actually everything else is kind of artifice, and the real stuff happens between two actors or two people.
And Stefanie, because you get the opportunity for your character to step into, you know, his cases and his work through her line of work and her profession, what was that experience in those scenes, you know, particularly looking at episodes 3 and 4, because she kind of becomes very interested initially just on a personal curiosity level, but then professionally becomes involved in that case?
Yeah, it was interesting because I was entering it through the scope of how do you deal with grief. Like that was the sort of way in, I guess, for her. And at that point in their relationship, they're sort of pushing apart from each other or trying to find each other or going through something very difficult. So it was lovely to be involved. Also great to sort of have that as them coming back together again. And also to just be a human who is curious and interested and has things to say, and to bring that into their relationship as a very real part of their life.
Yeah. And, Patrick and Ben, in also talking about Maigret's relationship with his superior at work, Knavel, they're kind of on very much opposite sides, and there's kind of a combustible element between the two of them, and it's an antagonistic force, but then they start to kind of understand each other a little bit more, but they don't come across as if they're ever going to be best friends at the same time. And, I wanted to ask you both about just shaping the different dynamics and the different moments of what that looks like when they're on the same page or on opposite sides at different points.
Ben,
Yeah,
this was fun for you, wasn't it? This was tricky to navigate this one.
it was tricky, I think, because we did end up in a place where they are kind of uneasy, friends is not the word, but allies. And we realized slightly, Patrick realized he might have written himself into a bit of a corner if we get on too well. So we were trying to keep a bit of, the power dynamic going, and we will continue to try and confound that. But it was nice to butt heads with someone and then kind of face outwards against the problems. Yeah, hard. You've asked a good question. I don't have a good answer, Patrick.
But I think Ben hit on the key thing there. It's new young detective is fights his superior. We have seen it once or twice before. We're helped by having Natalie, who's just has this strange winning quality to her, even when she's furious, and by Ben. But then as I said, I found the scenes where they are sort of warming to each other really lovely, and they were fun to write, and they just played them. But as Ben says, no, I've written myself out of the corner. They will be at war believably again. I found a way out of it, a really good way, I think. So I think I just want to see these actors when they're great as friends, they're great as enemies, and I think we want to see that dynamic.
Yeah. And it's even more interesting when it's completely non-linear and it can kind of go forwards and backwards at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, I really loved all of the episodes in this season, so congratulations on a great show, and thank you so much to all of you for talking about it. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.